Welcome, everyone, to another episode of the Gold Silver Bitcoin Show brought to you by the GoldSilverBitcoin.com store. We are more than honored to be sitting down today with James Wesley Rawles. He's a longtime author. He's known as, in some ways, the father of the American Redoubt movement. He is also the proprietor at Elk Creek Company at elkcreekcompany.net, where he sells antique guns pre-1899. James, is there anything else people should know about what you've been working on in recent years?
Well, my son and I set up cfapa.org, which is the Constitution First Amendment uh, Press Association. And there we provide press credentials to just about anyone who's a adult American citizen. I'm a big believer in citizen journalism, and at cfapa.org, people can download free press credentials. No
Great.
charge whatsoever.
Great.
Again, it's cfapa.org.
So I think one of the first, I came across your work while I was working at a precious metal store, if I recall correctly, probably around circa 2011, perhaps. And there was this idea going around of the end of the world as we know it. You'd written a book by then, and you had also founded, or rather, promoted a concept about the American Redoubt, which included several states as a sort of redoubt for conservative American citizens. And those states were, for instance, Eastern, Washington and Oregon, Idaho, Montana, I guess Northern Utah might have been as well included.
Wyoming is the other one. Yeah.
Wyoming. Great. Yeah. Could you speak to the evolution of the American Redoubt movement, sure, and if you think even the geography has evolved over the
just in a nutshell, the American Redoubt movement is a political internal migration movement that's designed to have conservatives, primarily Christians and Jews, move to those 5 states in order to turn what are already red counties into crimson red counties, to get a political lock on that entire region so that our constitutional rights are maintained regardless of what happens elsewhere in the country. Most of the people moving in right now are coming in from states like California, and they're basically disaffected conservatives who are fed up with California politics, crime, smog, traffic, taxes, everything, and they want out. And it's the whole idea of the American Redoubt movement is, again, a political migration movement. We're not secessionists, we're not racists. We just want to make conservative states even more conservative.
Were you surprised by how that concept took hold?
It was really amazing. It was quite surprising. When I came up with the concept back in 2011, I thought I might encourage, a few thousand people to move. Turns out it's been tens of thousands or even hundreds of thousands of people who have moved. And there's been a profound shift in politics, primarily in North Idaho, but you're seeing it throughout the Redoubt. And you're also seeing a lot of counties in Eastern Oregon that right now are petitioning to try to become part of Idaho because they're fed up with the state government, which is run west of the Cascade Mountain Range by a bunch of liberals. So it's really taken off. It's been quite gratifying to see the number of people who have subscribed to the whole concept of the Redoubt. We're doing our very best to make it inclusive. We're not racists. We're, if anything, religious separatists, in that we'd prefer to see Christians and Jews settle in the Redoubt rather than Muslims, just because we want to see traditional American values maintained in the region. But politically, it's been a win. Demographically, it's been a win. And it's showing no signs of slowing down whatsoever.
Can you speak more about the evolution of the American Redoubt since that concept first came up?
Well, yeah, it started out just with a blog post, and since then, it's really taken off. There are now umpteen companies with Redoubt in their company name, like Redoubt Surplus and Tactical and American Redoubt Realty and so forth. There's a large number of self-employed people who have moved to the Redoubt and brought their businesses with them, and they've ended up using Redoubt in their company names when they've relocated. There's a news service called Redoubt News. There's Radio Free Redoubt as a podcast. It's just amazing to see how it's kind of spread, and it's a kind of informal political movement as well, primarily through Republican central committees in various counties. But the strange thing is most of the so-called leaders of the Redoubt movement have never met each other. We're just basically, thought leaders of the movement, and we make blog posts or do podcasts or do public speaking engagements and encourage people to be part of the Redoubt movement. But it's really not a formal organization at all. It's very informal, very grassroots.
Can you speak to having used the internet in order to affect change in the real world?
Sure. Well, for example, one thing that I've done in addition to my blog and my books, I've had 3 New York Times bestsellers. My son and I set up a press credential organization called CFAPA, which is the Constitution Free Press Association. It's CFAPA, and it's a First Amendment organization that encourages people to be citizen journalists. And we realized that because basically everyone carries smartphones right now, everyone has the technical means to be a citizen journalist. It's right there in their pocket. What they lack are press credentials, and people are getting closed out of what should be public meetings, or they're denied the right to film things that go on in public, just out on the street, like interactions with the police, for example. So what we do is we provide free press credentials to any adult American citizen who requests them. And people can just download the credentials, attach a photograph, have it laminated, and boom, they've got press credentials. And that's been wildly successful, but in a very quiet way, because we keep absolutely no records. We don't have a membership roster. We don't keep track of who visits the site and how many people download the credentials. And we're very perspicacious about scrubbing our history for our website because we don't want to have any records. The whole idea of a free press is that it's an anonymous free press, and we want to make the press credentials available to anyone, any adult citizen, with no record keeping whatsoever.
And in the American Redoubt, there are some examples of, I guess, citizen journalists having success. I think you mentioned the Redoubt News Service, I believe, and then also there's Radio Free.
Redoubt News, right? That's run by a gal named Sherry DeValle, and it's been quite successful. And there's a number of others that have kind of popped up. And some have only been up for a few months and then they disappear, but others pop up in their place. But the whole concept is citizen journalism with sunshine laws that give access to all public meetings and the right to film anything that goes on in public. Any interaction in public, the Supreme Court has ruled numerous times that there is no expectation of privacy in any public place. So if you have overbearing police officers that are, like conducting warrantless searches or trouncing people's right to privacy, citizens should be able to film that on their smartphones, upload it to the internet, and hold those public officials accountable. And that's one reason why we have the press credentials. And it's something that crosses party lines. I have a lot in common with libertarians, even though I'm a conservative libertarian. everyone should have the right to document what goes on in any public place. That's just a fundamental human right and a constitutional right under the First Amendment.
Another YouTube channel that comes to mind is North Idaho Exposed by Casey Whalen out of Coeur d'Alene, Idaho, I believe, and he's been doing some interesting work on North Idaho and done quite well for in terms of subscribers for himself. So now the American Redoubt, the way I view it is that the geography has changed a little bit. I'm not so sure if I would run to Oregon or Washington to escape California's policies. In your mind, has the geographical boundaries of the American Redoubt evolved over the last decade in any way?
Well, we've left the boundaries where they are, but from a practical standpoint, yes, you're right. Because of the Californication of Oregon and Washington, Eastern Washington and Eastern Oregon are not quite as desirable as they used to be. But I'm quite hopeful that the counties of those two states will either form separate states or attach themselves to Idaho. For example, there's the Greater Idaho Movement, which is actually trying to get all of the counties of Eastern Oregon, the counties of Southwestern Oregon, and even a few counties in far northern California to become part of Idaho. Meanwhile, there's a organization called Liberty State, which is attempting to turn all the counties of Eastern Washington that are east of the Cascades into a new 51st state. And that state would be completely independent of Washington. It would have its own jurisdiction. It would just be another state of the Union. It's analogous to what happened when West Virginia split off from Virginia. So there are historical precedents for this. And I think as time goes on, as the divide between red counties and blue counties gets deeper and deeper, I think it's just about inevitable that a lot of states are going to end up in partition, and you're going to end up with upstate New York being a separate state, northern Colorado being a separate state, eastern Washington, eastern Oregon, and so forth, all splitting off. And there's some advantages to that politically in that each state has 2 senators, even if a state has a population of only a couple 100,000 people, it's still a state. So, for example, there's a large movement underway right now in Texas that's really gaining steam, and that is to turn Texas into 5 states, and they would end up with 10 U.S. senators.
I've read the work of, for instance, Joel Skousen, who's written about strategic relocation, and he also has kind of highlighted the American Redoubt in a way as a desirable location, and in particular, excuse me, he honed in on South Idaho and northern Utah as being kind of the most desirable, he believes. And his main reason is not to realign, I think, political boundaries, but rather, go ahead.
Yeah, go ahead.
But rather just be away from people. So what are your thoughts on that?
Well, I don't consider Utah to be quite as survivable in the event of a grid down collapse, because it's a state that's really short on water. And I think that in the event of a grid down collapse, Utah is going to revert to desert. In fact, so will a lot of South Idaho, but much of Idaho has very plentiful water. And much of Idaho also is a power exporting region for that reason. And in the event of a nationwide grid down collapse where the 3 power grids go down, I think power will be reconstituted very quickly in Idaho, Montana, Wyoming, and throughout the Northwest in Washington and Oregon, just because they're power exporting regions. There are already plans to do that. In fact, the failover can take just a matter of minutes before they could reconstitute the grid in the event that either the Western grid, the Eastern grid, or the Texas grid goes down. There are areas within each of those grids that plan to island their power and have their power come back up very quickly. One of those regions is the Four Corners region, where Colorado, Arizona, and New Mexico come together. And then throughout the inland Northwest, there's plans to island power. It's just a practical measure that will, in many ways, be beneficial, partly because if they island power in those regions, the local power co-ops bring power back up locally. That power can then be used to re-energize the grid to bring the rest of the grid back up. That's what they refer to as a dark startup. Without power operating somewhere, the vast majority of power plants cannot restart. They need outside power to get those power plants started.
Can you speak to kind of off the grid scenarios and what people need to know about how quickly they can develop after the initial event? I went to a prepper festival in Sandpoint, Idaho recently, and I spoke with, or rather I saw somebody speak there, Mr. Bonham, I believe was his name, Mr. Bonham. And he was speaking about, like, for instance, that 3 days is not an extended power outage. Can you speak to that?
Well, here in the inland Northwest, a lot of people live off grid. There's a tremendous interest in microhydro, wind power, and especially photovoltaic power. And given the reduced cost of photovoltaic panels in recent years, I think PV panels are probably the very best, most logical way for people to go to live off grid. Microhydro systems tend to be fairly high maintenance. Wind generators tend to be very high maintenance and fairly high cost per watt produced. But we've seen solar panels keep going down and down and down to well below $1 per watt produced. I'm a big believer in photovoltaic power. And of course, most people will also need a backup generator for extended periods of overcast where their photovoltaic power system may not be producing quite enough power. But I think that if in the event of a grid down collapse, a lot of people who read my blog won't even notice that it happens because they're living entirely off grid. And as time goes on, more and more people will be living off grid. And that's also changing the real estate market, because between photovoltaic power and Starlink, people can now just live about anywhere off grid and still be able to maintain, operate a business, have an internet presence, the whole works. I recently got signed up with Starlink. I've only had it about 2.5 months now, but I've been very impressed with its throughput. It's about 6 times faster than the dual band DSL that I used to use. And it's only $99 a month. There's a little bit of a delay. In fact, I'm talking with you on Starlink right now. There's about an 1/8 of a second delay. So if people are talking quickly, sometimes they can talk over each other and not realize it. But otherwise, with technologies like photovoltaic power and Starlink, it's completely revolutionizing the real estate business, because properties that were heretofore considered very remote and difficult to sell are now considered prime properties because people are looking for isolation.
Did you watch the Starlink project from before it was launched? And can you kind of tell us about why you were excited about it, why you were eager to try it, and anything else about what it's been like to use, and even what it is?
Well, yeah, Starlink is a low Earth orbit satellite system. It acts as if it's geosynchronous, but it actually isn't. The satellites actually orbit the Earth, and when you have a Starlink connection, you're actually being handed off from satellite to satellite as they pass over. It's a fairly sophisticated system. It was very well thought out. They're in the process of launching thousands of these Starlink satellites. Each time they do a launch, you could actually see them at night. It looks like a train of shiny dots in the sky before they gradually separate and into wider tracks. But Starlink is really an amazing technology. It has very fast download speed and fairly fast upload speed. It's certainly capable enough for video conferencing or video calls like we're on right now, for example. The cost is fairly low. The availability is very high. We're talking 99.9% of the time you'll be able to use Starlink. Even in very heavy overcast or whatever, it works tremendously well. I live in an area where we get a lot of snow, and I found that because the Starlink dish draws 70 watts of power, it's a little bit warm. And 9 times out of 10, it's going to be tilted at that dish, which is only about 20 inches in diameter, is going to be tilted at an angle to be locked onto a particular satellite path. So between the angle it sits at and the fact that it's drawing 70 watts of power and is warm, it stays shed of snow very, very readily. You don't have to go out and sweep it off. It keeps itself free of snow. So it's an incredibly reliable system. I'm not particularly fond of the politics of the parent company, but as long as they keep politics out of their business model, then I think it's going to be a very good opportunity for people to live in very lightly populated regions. And for people who are prepper minded, again, that's going to revolutionize the entire real estate market for rural real estate. My eldest son runs a business called survivalrealty.com, which specializes in retreat properties. And he's noticed that the really remote properties are now selling just as quickly as the ones that are close into town.
So for those who are not off grid, who perhaps don't have the means to even think about purchasing property right now, what are some of the steps they can take to ensure that if the grid does go down and things stay relatively for a short period of time, what do they need on hand?
Well, even for someone who lives in the suburbs or even an urban area, the main thing that they need to have on hand is a means of water filtration and food storage. And if you're in a cold climate, you also need some source of heating. In my most recent book, which is the Ultimate Prepper Survival Guide, I talked about how people who live in urban areas or suburbs can kind of make a house within a house, using the whole concept of a box bed. In French, that's called a lit clos. And the whole idea there is you can just with your own body heat warm a small area. Say you were to tent in the area under a large dining room table, for example. You stack books on top of that table and drape blankets over the edge of the table. And even in a power failure or a situation where there's no natural gas available piped to a house, you can keep yourself warm all through a winter simply by sleeping in that area like an old-fashioned box bed. For someone who lives in the suburbs or in an urban area, I recommend first and foremost getting a good quality water filter. In fact, it's probably best to get two. One large water filter, a ceramic filter like a big Berkey, and then a compact trail filter, something like a Katahdin filter, and that's spelled Katahdin, K-A-T-A-D-Y-N, but spoken Katahdin, like Mount Katahdin in, where's that, Vermont or New Hampshire. With a water filter, you can be sure that even if you're drawing water from open sources, whether it's runoff from your roof or from a lake, a pond, or a stream, that you're still going to have good, pure, drinkable water. And then you'll be able to provide that to your family and hopefully to a neighbor or two, so that you're not going to fall prey to the diseases that will probably crop up very quickly if the power grids go down and open water sources get fouled in urban and suburban areas. So water filtration is absolutely at the top of the list. Again, a big Berkey filter and a Katahdin filter would probably be the best to get. And then for food storage, I recommend that people just start out simply by doubling up on the staple foods that they buy on a regular basis, and then making sure that they package those foods in a way that vermin won't get to them. Now, I'm a big believer in 5-gallon food grade plastic buckets, and at my blog site, which is survivalblog.com, I describe how you can use Mylar liners and then the dry ice method, for example, or using commercially made oxygen absorber packets to package bulk foods like wheat, rice, beans, flour, whatever, in those 5-gallon buckets in such a way that even if insects have gotten to them and laid eggs in them, when the eggs hatch, the larvae will either won't hatch or they'll die immediately because, for lack of oxygen. So food storage is probably number 2 on the list. And then beyond that, you got to think in terms of self-defense, communications, and medical.
One last question on the American Redoubt. I'm curious, what are your thoughts on the Californication of Montana?
Well, actually, Montana's starting to go the other way. I have a lot of readers in Montana, and they tell me that, for example, Montana just got its first Republican governor in more than 20 years. He's actually originally from New Jersey, but he's a conservative. He homeschooled his kids. Montana has always been a little bit of a Democrat stronghold because it was a mining state originally. It's even a little bit more Democrat than Idaho, but the last few general elections, it's definitely gone Republican. And I think Montana still has one US senator who is a Democrat, but even he is a pro-gun Democrat and doesn't dare try to sign up for any legislation that would restrict the Second Amendment. So I think Montana is already a conservative state, and it's the Democrat presence that's been there long term, I think, is going to continue to weaken with time, because even the Democrat Party leaders in Montana are pro-gun. So it's a different, they're almost like Southern Democrats in that they're conservative, libertarian, God-fearing Democrats. They're not like typical Chicago or East Coast Democrats.
Dare I say, a lot of the liberals, the people who are analogous to those living in California in these inland Northwest states are kind of like, I've heard this term used by someone else, left libertarians, if you will. And it's much different than, I suppose, a social democrat that you might see elsewhere. So what about the trajectory of Idaho? Any thoughts on that?
Well, Idaho is conservative and getting more conservative. The old guard Republican rhinos of Southern Idaho are being pushed out by more genuinely conservative and libertarian Republicans. The current governor of Idaho is a guy by the name of Brad Little, and he's in a lot of trouble with the Republican Party right now because he was first in favor of mask mandates and now is in favor of vaccination mandates. And I think his days are numbered. He's probably going to be replaced by a female Republican lieutenant governor. Her name, I think, is Janice McGeachin. She's a genuine conservative, and I think Brad Little should be looking over his shoulder right now because I think she's gaining on him very quickly. The next time there's a gubernatorial race in Idaho, I think McGeachin is probably going to win, and the Republican lock on Idaho politics is going to get even stronger, and the old guard kind of middle of the road Republicans are being pushed out by more genuine conservative and libertarian Republicans.
I want to talk a little bit about antique guns. I know you run Elk Creek Company. Can you tell me a little bit about that?
Yeah, I've always been a big believer in investing in tangibles, whether it's gold, silver, productive farmland, even classic cars or Swiss watches. Anything really tangible makes sense in an age of inflation, because anything else that you have that's dollar denominated could be at risk. And I fell upon antique guns as a solution. I used to be a federal firearms license holder, but I recognize that guns made before 1899 are not considered firearms under federal law. They can be bought and sold without a paper trail across state lines by just about anyone in like 47 of the 50 states. There's a huge advantage to antique guns. Now, a lot of these guns that kind of spanned the turn of the century shoot modern cartridges, modern smokeless cartridges. But if you buy a gun that's in a serial number range that makes it antique, it's a no paperworker. Whereas if you buy, say you have a Winchester model 1894 with a serial number like 148,000, that's a gun that was made in 1898. But if you buy one with a serial number like 143,000, that's one that was made in 1898 rather than 1899. And there's a huge legal advantage to having a gun made in 1898 or earlier. And there's a lot of very capable guns like Mausers, Winchesters, Colt and Smith & Wesson revolvers, for example, Webley revolvers like the early Webley Mark I and Mark II that shoot fairly modern cartridges, but there's no paperwork required. And if we ever get into an era where we have nationwide gun registration, I believe that pre-1899 guns, at least for a while, will continue to be exempt because that threshold date of December 31st, 1898 has been frozen ever since 1968. So we're talking about 0.1% of the guns in circulation are legally antique under federal law. So as with each passing year, they become less and less of an issue because there's more modern guns being produced. And they froze that threshold ever since 1968 at the end of 1898 for an antique. So I think that there's a huge investing potential there, even for someone who doesn't shoot. Go buy yourself a couple of pre-1899 guns, whether it's an old Winchester Model 94 that was made in 1898 or earlier, or Winchester Model 1897 shotgun from the first or second year of production, or just like a Swedish Mauser that has a 1895 through 1898 date on the receiver ring. If you find one of those, buy it, because you're not going to lose money. The differentiation between antique guns and modern guns is fairly widely known, and as time goes on, they're going to become a very small number of guns in circulation compared to modern guns, and their prices are only going to increase. It's like buying a pre-World War II Swiss Rolex, or buying a pre-1970 muscle car. They're not making any more of them. They're only going to go up in value. And in the case of antique guns, they're compact, fairly fungible, and very practical. You know, you can't shoot someone with a Krugerrand. I guess you could with a slingshot, but it wouldn't be very effective. Pre-1899 guns have a number of advantages. One is that they're the legal advantage, and the other, of course, is that they're still practical guns to shoot. If you buy cartridge guns from the 1890s, you're still shooting fairly modern, high-velocity cartridges that are still factory made. So there's big advantages to pre-1899 federally exempt guns.
What do people need to know about these guns? What do you think is cool about them? Also, just kind of that's subjective, but also what do they need to know while looking to invest in this sector?
Well, there's a number of resources online. In fact, I was the co-author of an FAQ on pre-1899 guns. If you're going to go to a gun show looking for them, a lot of the dealers don't even realize what they have on their tables. But if you have a list showing the serial number breaks between antique Winchesters and modern Winchesters, for example, the ones that are made on or before December 31st of 1898, if you carry that list with you that shows the serial number breaks for each of the models, knowledge is power, because already those guns are worth 20% more than one that's otherwise identical, made 1899 or later. So get smart on antique guns. Find out for the models that you're interested in, find out the serial number breaks. There's a few guns that have the date of manufacture stamped right on the receiver ring, like some Spanish Mausers or Swedish Mausers, for example. But with others, you really have to do some research to know what's what. Like, for example, on a Chilean Mauser, if you see one that's marked Loewe Berlin, you know it's antique. If you see one marked Deutsches Waffenmunitionfabrik, then you know it's probably modern. So do your research before you shop. Try to find guns that are chambered in current factory loaded ammunition. That, I think, is kind of the sweet spot for antique guns. Yes, there's a lot of people who collect percussion revolvers from the Civil War. Yeah, they're really cool and interesting, but they're not really practical as shooters. Whereas if you buy a Swedish Mauser made in 1895, it's just as capable as a Swedish Mauser made in the 1940s. It shoots 6.5 by 55 Swedish Mauser, which is a fantastic flat shooting deer class or self-defense class cartridge. So get smart, do your research, do your homework before you go to a gun show, print out a reference like the pre-1899 FAQ that I mentioned, and carry that with you when you go to a gun shop, a pawn shop, or a gun show. And then when you find a gun that's legally antique, that's in good condition, has a nice bore condition, good mechanical condition, and chambered in a fairly modern cartridge, jump on it. Again, knowledge is power.
Does the same apply in your line of thinking to like pre-1933 gold and semi-numismatic silver coins?
Yeah, I'm actually more of a believer in silver rather than gold. You know, of course, in 1933, we had the Roosevelt confiscation that went on, but that only applied to gold, not silver. And yes, people who had pre-1933 numismatic gold were able to keep it legally, whereas just regular circulating bullion, $20 and $5, $10 gold pieces had to turn them in. So there are some advantages for pre-1933 gold, but in my mind, unless you have international bug out plans, I'm a much bigger believer in silver rather than gold. Granted, right now the gold to silver ratio is what, around 90 to 1 right now. So silver is much more bulky per dollar invested, but silver has several advantages. One is silver is much more likely to double than gold. It's a long way from $1,800 to $3,600. It is not far at all from $24 to $48 for silver. The chances of silver doubling rather than gold doubling are much higher. It's almost like buying penny stocks. The other advantage of silver, of course, is from a survival standpoint. Silver is very practical for barter, whereas gold is not. Gold is actually too compact a form of wealth for practical barter. You could conceivably take a American Eagle gold coin or American Buffalo or Canadian Maple Leaf and a cold chisel and make yourself, you know, 4 quarter-ounce gold pieces out of a 1-ounce coin with a, you know, sit down there with a cold chisel and make yourself increments. But it's not really practical like silver that's already in small increments. And in the case of pre-1965 US silver dimes, quarters, and half dollars, they're fairly widely recognized. And if we ever get into a real dollar crisis with mass inflation, everyone's going to very quickly get smart about pre-1965 90% silver US circulated coins, was commonly called junk silver. People will get smart very quickly on that. And again, it's small and practical for barter. And in the case of dimes, quarters, and half dollars, they're not being faked. US silver dollars are now being very widely faked by the Chinese and coming back into the States. That's kind of a scary prospect. I'm not buying Morgan or even peace dollars right now, simply for fear of buying Chinese fakes. In the case of well-circulated dimes, quarters, and half dollars, at least for now, that is not an issue. The Chinese are not faking those. And when you see those, you have a very high level of confidence that You're getting the genuine article. It's 90% silver. And again, most people recognize them for what they are. And I think they'll be ideal for small purchases in a collapse environment or post-collapse, where even if the US dollar is wiped out, people will still be doing business with dimes, quarters, and half dollars minted in or before 1964. So pre-1965 US silver, 90% silver coins. They'll still be doing business with those, and probably common caliber ammunition will be the other thing that'll be the other primary barter currency, because it's also compact, widely recognizable, and fungible.
I see that at Elk Creek Company, where you're selling and I suppose buying antique guns, you are pushing pre-65 silver coinage as means of payment. Can you discuss accepting junk silver for payment and your experience?
What I did, I set up my website, and the way I did it is I use WordPress, and there's a WordPress plugin that allows foreign currencies. Well, I hired a friend to do some very easy coding, and they created pre-1965 US silver coinage as an alternate currency for the shopping cart system for my business. So now people can select either between paying for an antique gun with pre-1965 silver coins, which is the primary way I'm pricing all my guns, or they can pay me with Federal Reserve notes using a multiplier. And so, for example, up on my site right now, I've got a Ludwig Loewe Chilean Mauser that's been sporterized into 243 Winchester, and it's listed at $55. That's the price if you were to pay me in US dimes, quarters, or half dollars. But with the multiplier, which is currently 22.9 times face value, that same gun would be $1,295.
Why'd you choose to price things in junk silver?
Well, for two reasons. One is I don't want to see my family live through a period of mass inflation and see my mail order business cleaned out of inventory, and then all I have to show for it at the end is a pile of worthless paper. So part of it was preservation of wealth on my own part, in that I want to be able to turn antique guns into silver so that if we do go through a mass inflation, I'm not going to lose my purchasing power. The other was actually to educate my readers as to the reality of the fact that they're being robbed every day by inflation, and that we haven't had real, genuine currency, real bona fide money in this nation since the end of 1964, when US silver coinage went out of general circulation. There was still some 40% silver produced in half dollars between 1965 and 1970, but that was basically, just for show. We haven't had real money in circulation since 1964. And it's my pleasure to accept pre-1965 silver coinage, again, for preservation of my own wealth, and so that I'm educating my readers and my customers as to the reality of inflation, which is really a hidden form of taxation.
Can you speak to the inflation that we're seeing today?
Wow. Yeah. The producer price index just hit an all-time high. I think we're looking at, in reality, somewhere between 15 and 25% inflation in this country. The US government statistics on inflation are highly skewed because they have this mythical shopping cart of items purchased, and they conveniently leave out items like food and fuel, which is absurd, because if you look at what people buy every month, two of the largest segments of what they spend their paychecks on are food and fuel. If you put food and fuel back into the government statistics on inflation, you wouldn't be seeing 6.8% inflation. You'd see something more like 16.8% inflation. There's a website run by a guy by the name of John Williams called Shadow Stats. It's shadowstats.com. And there he recreates, for example, the U.S. Treasury stopped publishing the M1 figure on dollars in circulation, for example. He uses mathematical models to recreate those statistics, and he also does calculations on inflation, for example, that use the pre-1975 standards for judging inflation. And some of the results are really astonishing. Again, it's shadowstats.com.
Any other comments, Jim, on any of the topics we've discussed today, from the American Redoubt? Actually, did you see the recent documentary on the Times on the American Redoubt? So any other comments on the American Redoubt, on antique guns, on silver, particularly junk silver, or inflation, etc.?
Yeah, well, it's interesting you mentioned the Times documentary. There's actually been 2 documentaries recently produced that were basically hit pieces on the American Redoubt. One was done by the Times of London. The other just aired a few days ago, and it was done by Vice News. And I think it was a piece on religious conservatives in the United States, and they dedicated about 10 minutes toward the end of it to bashing on me and bashing on the American Redoubt. The Redoubt movement is in full swing, and no matter how upset it makes liberals and statists, it's not stopping. The number of people moving to the Redoubt is only going to continue to increase, and as the more populous coastal states continue to implode with bad policies, crime, smog, traffic, homelessness, and just insane levels of government, the number of people wanting to move to the Redoubt states, I think, is only going to increase. And the political consolidation of the Redoubt states, I think, is going to continue to develop to the point where I think in the long run, we're probably going to see several state partition movements. Again, I'm not in favor of secession, but I'm strongly in favor of partition to create the 51st, 52nd, 53rd American states. I think it's going to happen not just in our lifetimes, but within this decade.
That makes more sense to me than effort like the Greater Idaho State, which seems like it might be more complicated than just one state.
Not only is it going to require the sign off of the state legislature for Idaho, it'll require the sign off for the other state as well that's losing those counties, as well as the U.S. Congress is going to need to sign off on it. And that may sound like a pretty high hurdle right now, but I think as the economy continues to deteriorate, a lot of states are going to see their rural counties really as a drag on their finances. If you look at Oregon and Washington, for example, the tax bases of those states are much stronger west of the Cascades. In effect, the states of Oregon and Washington subsidize those eastern counties right now. They're actually an economic drain on the states. So as those states approach a fiscal crisis, the willingness of those state legislatures to let those counties go, I think, will be much higher.
Jefferson State and the Liberty State seems like a potential
oh yes, I think both
are
very likely to gain steam in the next few years. And again, the political reality will begin to match the economic reality and the demographic reality that already exists in those states. Right now, in Eastern Oregon and Eastern Washington, they basically have nothing in common with the political leadership west of the Cascades. Socially, politically, economically, and on issues like abortion, gun control, homeschooling, home churching, home birth, all those things, it's like night and day on one side of the Cascades versus the other. So I think inevitably those counties are going to end up in separate states. it's going to happen.
We've had the honor of sitting down today with James Wesley Rawles. He is a 3-time New York Times bestseller. He's was first known for his blog at survivalblog.com for coining the idea and term of the American Redoubt. And he also is currently the proprietor at Elk Creek Company, where he sells pre-1899 antique guns. Thank you so much, Jim, for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me on, Justin. I pray the 91st Psalm for you and all your listeners and viewers.
Blessings. Thank you so much for listening.